The European View Podcast. Your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal, brought to you by the Martenscentre. With Sara Pini.
Hello, and welcome back to the European View Podcast, your way to navigate through the main issues of our policy journal with valuable insights from the author themselves. I'm Sara Pini, Senior Research Officer at the Martenscentre, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming Arjen Siegmann, who's Professor at the Vrije Universiteit of Amsterdam, Research Associate at the CDA Research Institute, and member of our Martenscentre Executive Board, to discuss his article on the latest issue of the European View, which is titled The Farmers' Revolt in the Netherlands, Causes and Consequences. As always, you can find this and all the other articles of the European View on our website, martenscentre.eu. So, Arjen, welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you.
So, your article starts with a brief account of the events of the farmers' revolt that started in the Netherlands in 2019 and led to the creation and the rapid but quite short-lived success of the farmer citizen movement known as BBB. But what I find the most interesting in your article, and that I would like to discuss with you today, is the psychological mechanisms that you identify behind these developments. And the first one is intentionality. Or to be more precise, and here I quote from your article, the human sensitivity to perceived intent, regardless of the actual actions. So I really find this interesting. Can you tell us how this mechanism played in the events that you describe?
Yes, I can. Yeah, so this started from like an observation that if you look at the situation of farmers in the Netherlands and policies, that if you take the view, say, of a civil servant or some scientist, then you could say, well, everybody agrees that there are some problems with farming and maybe the impact it has on the environment and nature. Something needs to happen. So, but if you dive into that especially with people who are very civil servant minded or managerial minded, they don't always understand why farmers were so angry. And we had it in the Netherlands, we had it in Germany. So what I'm proposing is that what happened is not just some government measures or some idea that something needs to happen, but farmers perceived politicians or the government as not trustworthy. And my example is that there was a politician from the coalition government who said the number of farmers has to be reduced by 50%. Yeah, that struck hard. That struck into the minds of the farmers. Are you going to expel us from the country? It sounds so dramatic and negative of the whole of idea of being a farmer. That was kind of the ignition of the whole protests, if you look back. And the story I tell in the paper is that actually this is how people perceive what politics does. Like they don't like us or they don't want us. And then whatever happens afterwards is not, doesn't help. Even if the government says, oh, yeah, we didn't mean it. We're going to fix it. Like what happened in Germany. They wanted to abolish the discount farmers have on diesel, like the red diesel. That led to farmers' protests, and then the government said, "Oh yeah, we will withdraw it." That doesn't mean that it's now over. That relationships are good because the government has shown its intent of wanting to increase the taxes that farmers pay. So that's my point of intent, and we are very sensitive as humans to that perceived intent.
Yeah, and you cannot take it back once it's done.
And once you've done it, so shall I tell you the story of C.S. Lewis, which I say in the paper?
Yes.
So,
Actually, I was going to ask because it's Narnia,
yeah.
C.S. Lewis, right?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis, a thinker, and he has this story about as kind of a proof that we live in a moral universe. Is suppose you're in the subway or in the metro, you're in Brussels, and you exit the metro, and then someone sticks out his leg by accident, and you trip over it, you fall, but there's no hurt, no permanent damage. Well, your day goes on like nothing happened. But what if someone tries to make you fall when you exit the metro and fails to do it? You see it coming. No harm is done, but you feel really bad. Someone has tried to make you trip over on purpose. This is a strong, I think, message. Like, we live in a moral universe of intent, and if we see something, someone trying to do a bad thing that hurts us, it gives a deep impression.
The second mechanism that you speak about is the status quo bias. This time you use it to explain the government decision-making process rather than its impact or how it is perceived. How does this apply here?
So here's the problem, and I think it is related to that of the position of farmers, but maybe other areas in the EU that need some reform, which is that people are very reluctant to realize a small setback, which is kind of, well, counterintuitive. You would think, well, small changes are not so painful. Let's do small changes. But it turns out that people are very reluctant to small changes and are actually find it easier to accept big changes when they have to. And that sounds not really rational, but that's how people are. Suppose I have to pay €1 for a cup in a store. Maybe that makes me a little bit angry because I don't want to pay this euro. I think it's unfair. But how much is €1? You know, and I might have to pay €100 for something. Parking fine. Where I say, I knew it was coming or something. And the €100 is 100 times more, but the emotional response is not much different from the €1. So this is a mechanism which makes reform in politics of a particular kind. That usually small reforms are not easily done. Something has to go badly wrong, and then there seems to be some support for bigger changes. It's a fact of life, but it's not easy.
But it's very interesting. And there's a third mechanism that you mentioned to me, but that for reason of space you couldn't put in the article. The self-binding mechanism. Tell us more about this one.
Okay, we are deep into the mechanisms,
Yes.
Sarah. That is cool. It's maybe also my job as professor to do these things, kind of to sometimes reduce the complex world to some mechanisms we can understand. But what I think is very positive about the EU is this concept of self-binding. So why is the EU there? Why does it have all these rules? Think Natura 2000, the nature conservation areas. Well, it's because Europe can do something that can help countries to bind themselves to a promise. So take the Dutch government. Suppose we promise to protect some government. Okay, some government decides we want to protect a particular area. Then we know how democracy works or politics. Maybe a few years later, there is a government that decides not to do it. This is a problem of politics. We call it like a consistency problem in politics. Every 4 years or sometimes sooner, the government can turn course and do something else, which is fine. I mean, that's how democracy works. This is what voters want. But there are some problems that require that you remain consistent for the next 20 or longer, 10 or 20 years. And then the EU, one way to interpret the benefit of the EU is that it can help to bind governments to their own promises, which is what happened with the nature conservation areas. So governments could say, these are our natural areas that we want to protect. But then the EU, like 10 years down the road, will hold you to that promise by giving you, strict rules or fines if you don't do it. And from an economic point of view, this is really a benefit because it makes things possible that otherwise would not be possible. If there's no EU, nothing above the state, then a government can change course every few years. For some problems, that is really bad.
So, from all that we discussed so far, so all these psychological mechanisms that can allow us to better understand the reaction to a certain policy, especially we are talking especially about the EU policies for climate change, for biodiversity, etc. You spoke about Natura 2000. How can we use what you said so far to better design and better communicate these kind of policies?
Well, that is a good question. Well, it's always hard to just take some mechanism and then build one policy, but a few of the lessons also from the farmers' revolt, is that the nation state and farmers are seen as being really important, also to normal people. If I take the example of farmers, the Farmers Party in the Netherlands won the provincial elections in every province. They became the largest party. And they still are, by the way. You said it was short-lived, their success. Well, that's in the polls, or in the parliamentary elections, they didn't do that well. But in the provincial elections, they became the biggest party everywhere, and they are in these coalitions that are now governing. So they're still there. And even in a city like Amsterdam, we don't have a lot of farmers in Amsterdam, but I think they got a lot of a high percentage of the vote. I don't know the exact number, maybe between 5 and 10%, which is still a lot. And this was kind of surprising for a lot of people who thought our policies, we need to do politics aimed at the city dwellers. Turns out this farmers have a big appeal to normal voters who all have something with that. That's one big lesson. I don't neglect that. Another one is the nation state, that people really feel protected and have a big attachment to the national identity. And that can be a problem if you see the future as the EU should do more. I'm just saying it in a careful way. Like, there's something what you hear, especially from European politicians, which I understand, like the EU should do more here and there. And it seems that people prefer the nation state to do more. I don't think the normal guy appreciates Brussels doing more.
Okay, we'll go back to this later, but first, there's one variable that we haven't introduced yet, and that is money. Because we all know that the share of the EU budget dedicated to common agriculture policy has considerably decreased over the years to 73.2% in 1980, and it went down to about 24.6% in 2023. And this share is probably going to further decrease to finance other new priorities, especially defense. Of course, this is going to be a big issue, digital transition, etc. So, how can we square the circle of combining efficiency, sustainability, and affordability in the farming sector with the reduced budget?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, maybe let me make a small detour. Like, I know from like a civil servant from the European Commission a few years ago said that I asked him, like, what is your criteria for taking an action on European level? And I think kind of the answer was like efficiency, which kind of meant on European level everything works better. You should do almost everything on European level. That's not what he said, but that's kind of my interpretation. So I asked him, like, what is then the benefit of doing something on a national level in your eyes? And he said, well, then you can cater to different preferences. Now, this is maybe someone from the European Commission or working for the European Commission. I don't know exactly the position of this person, but that seems to be the thinking, like Brussels does everything better. And your question is about agriculture. I don't know if that's still true. Maybe we need to have a hard look at what should the EU do and what shouldn't it do. And of course, in Brussels or Strasbourg, there's always a direction to do more. But maybe there's like a grand bargain or a deal that could be made. Say, some things are better done at the national level, and some other things. You mentioned defense. Why not turn some defense spending from national level to the European level? I'm not saying the European Commission should do it. I don't know what organization, but move some of that national spending to a higher level, and then you don't have to spend more, but you spend it in a better way by doing it in a coordinated way on a European level. And then that doesn't cost more money, but you get more outcome for your euro. And that seems to be the European way. But then you have to make really clear to everybody why this is better done on a European level. And to me, like, defense industry seems an obvious case. Defense itself, where you want to combine the strengths of each country and not have your own equipment and people everywhere.
You said that this is not the case for the agricultural policies. And actually, this is linked to the budget issue because, of course, with less budget, there's also talk about renationalization of the common agriculture, at least partial renationalization of the common agricultural policy. So you think that this would be well received by the farmers' communities?
Well, if you put it like that, I don't see why not. I mean, I know that many farmers receive subsidies from Brussels. I'm saying Brussels, but I mean EU subsidies. But it must be the case that also farmers themselves, at the end of the day, sitting at the table doing their accounting, think, so we live, say, we're in the Netherlands, we pay our taxes, some of it goes to the EU, and then some of it comes back. So is this a smart way of doing it? I mean, let every country spend its own money or subsidies on agriculture. That seems like I think that's an idea that has occurred with more farmers, isn't it? So yeah, and that
Yeah, I think it's a quite debated
yeah,
question because, of course,
yeah.
some fear that if things go back to the national level, they will do something.
Yeah.
But as you point out, there are sectors in which doing things together means a scale economy. So you produce more or with less money, basically. Another case in which we could just think about it.
Yeah.
Maybe there is room for improvement.
Yeah, and if I can add that also it seems that if you look at the trade within Europe, also in agricultural products, so cross-border trade seems to be not as high as you would expect. So maybe very traditional, EU policy, trade barriers, the internal market. That is maybe where some more focus should be to have a bit more competition. Maybe some countries are better at producing something than another country. And then if there are subsidies, use it to facilitate that trade and maybe the side effects of that trade.
Okay, thank you very much, Arjen. It was really interesting, this discussion.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And for those listening in, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and discover all the interesting insights of the European view on our website, martenscentre.eu, and on all our social media channels. Thank you, and stay tuned for more.
This was the European View podcast, your place to navigate the insights of our policy journal. Follow the Martens Centre for more.